And again, I said yes to that. And it took me so long to understand that just because I said yes to one thing, it didn't like throw the door open to all the future yeses of all the future questions he asked me. But that's what it had felt to me at the time. And it felt like I couldn't say no. And our relationship got very violent very quickly.
Welcome to Suburban Warrior, the podcast that will impact, inspire, and empower you to transform your mindset and become the badass warrior that you are. I'm your host and fellow warrior, Chrissy Pfeiffer, former clinician and corporate marketing exec turned multi-passionate entrepreneur, performance and life coach, and mom to 4 not-so-little warriors. Each week, I will bring you honest conversations with inspiring guests to share their stories of resilience, optimism, success, and simple yet effective strategies so that you transform your thoughts and change your behavior to get the results you want in your life. You will be empowered to take action, warrior up, and believe in you. Let's do this. What's up, warriors? Welcome back to another episode of the Suburban Warrior Podcast. I am really excited to welcome my guest today because this is a topic on the podcast that we have not had yet. And here we are in season 5. And I can honestly say we have not heard a story like we will hear today. So I'm so excited to introduce Alexandra Ford, a former trafficking victim turned activist, embarked on her anti-trafficking journey at 11. After 10 years and personal hardships, she recognized her experience as human trafficking. With a candid storytelling approach and strong academic background, she bridges communities, educates on tough subjects, and empowers change. She co-founded Uprising in Wyoming and her personal brand, The Laughing Survivor, in British Columbia. Alexandra's strength and resilience inspires others to persevere and foster compassion. Welcome to the podcast, Alexandra.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Like I said, I am really thrilled to have you here. I am excited to hear your story. And I want to thank you for being on the podcast to share it with us, because I have to say this is certainly a topic that, I'm sure like many other people, we hear about it, but I don't really know that much about it, except for the fact that I can't even believe that something like this exists. I know that it exists everywhere. I'm in Pennsylvania. I know that it's in my backyard for sure. I remember, I hear stories, but yet it feels something that is so disconnected really from us.
Yeah.
And it's just so horrendous. So to think about this actually happening to someone on a personal level, is absolutely unreal to even fathom. So I'm really excited to hear your story. So let's get right into it. First of all, tell us a little bit about your background. Let's start there.
Sure. And you know what? You're not alone in saying you feel like you don't know much about human trafficking. You know it exists, but it's sort of that thing that you've placed in that category of not something I need to worry about, in North America or whatever, because that is a fairly common reaction. That's where I was until I found out what happened to me was trafficking. And I worked in the helping field and I'd gone to court against my abuser, like all of that. So to say like, I feel like I'm not in the know about this, totally fair. And the fact that you are taking your platform to have me on and talk about a subject that I think a lot of us are sort of like, I actually quite like it on the shelf over there where I don't have to worry about it, is so important, because that is how we have more people who go, actually, maybe I do know a little bit about that. And now I can help or recognize or prevent or whatever it is.
Right.
So with that, my background, so I was a child nerd, and I mean that in all of the best ways. But I was an absolute bookworm. I was a very opinionated bookworm. So I was sort of a loudmouth, but a bookworm, which doesn't really mesh as a kid. So I didn't fit in with the cool kids. I didn't fit in with the nerds so well. I didn't really know what I was into until I had a teacher who read us a story, a newspaper article about child labor and exploitation. And I found my thing with advocacy. So I just really jumped into this advocacy piece, and that has been a vein that has followed me through my whole life. So I'm going to skip ahead and just sort of like give a background on where I am now, and then we can talk more about my story, as it were. So after several twists and turns that we'll get into, I have found my way back to advocacy, because it really is that thing that feels like my calling, for lack of a better word. And now I work in the anti-human trafficking industry. And when I found my way back to advocacy, it was through post-secondary education. So I jumped in, I really kind of clawed my way back to that like nerdy little kid I had been when I was in my 20s, and I went to post-secondary. And I thrived. I got a diploma in community and justice services. I got a bachelor's in criminology. I got a postgrad in victimology. And most recently, I got a master's in psychology. And everything at the intersection of helping people in crime and human rights, I was just trying to learn so much about it. And so I worked in and around this area. I worked with youth offenders. I worked in domestic violence shelters. I worked with what's called the Victim Witness Assistance Program. So they're sort of your court support for victims and witnesses going through the court system. And so I've worked in and around this area, but I had no idea that what had happened to me was human trafficking. So I have all this knowledge. I have all these degrees. I even went, like I said, I went to court against my trafficker. And it wasn't until I met someone when I was living in Wyoming who introduced the idea to me that like that wasn't just domestic violence. That was trafficking. Like that involved coercion and you being forced into doing things you didn't want to do through the use of coercion and manipulation and fraud and all of that. And so for me, that just like was this huge light bulb moment of I have all these degrees, all this education, all this work experience. I literally work and live in like what I call the law and order SVU field, right? Not as law enforcement, but within everything you see on that show.
Right.
And I had no idea what human trafficking was or that it had happened to me 10 years prior. So that is what really channeled me into the anti-trafficking advocacy world. And I co-founded Uprising with the woman who helped me understand what happened to me, Terry Markham, in Wyoming. And then when my family and I moved back to Canada, I knew I still wanted to do anti-trafficking work. But quite frankly, after founding one nonprofit, I wasn't interested in founding another because it's a lot of work. And I thought, at this point with my education and my knowledge and being a lived experience expert and an academic consultant, I'm going to work from a for-profit business. And that's where the Laughing Survivor came from. And that allows me to do both pro bono work and for-profit work and just help educate communities and law enforcement and everyone I can about like what human trafficking is and what it isn't, because what it isn't is just as important as what it is.
Yeah. And I'm so fascinated and can't wait to hear your story, because I think when most people think of human trafficking, they think of like almost like kidnapping, right? Like kidnapping, taking someone against their will and shipping them somewhere overseas and putting them, in quote unquote human trafficking. We don't really even know what that means, right? We think it's sexual assault. We think it's labor. We don't really know, but we don't think of it as someone that can be involved in something for a 10-year period or, manipulation, coercion, all of these things. I think we think of it as more of this like violent event that happens, or like a kidnapping, if you will. So explain to us a little bit about what happened to you in that journey for you.
Absolutely. So what you described as like the kidnapping and the shipping container overseas, all of that's human smuggling.
Okay, right.
And so the human smuggling and human trafficking are very often conflated. And that is why we don't see human trafficking. We don't think of human trafficking is something that happens here, right? It's that thing that happens to those people over there, whatever that means. But when we're talking about human trafficking, especially domestic sex trafficking, we are talking about stuff that often looks like intimate partner violence and is mistaken for domestic violence and is mistaken for someone who has made poor life choices or loves what they're doing when they get on stage at the strip club every night or, whatever that is. And the reason so many of us and so many members in the community who need help go unidentified and misidentified is because of this lack of understanding of what it is. So for myself, how did I go from, 11-year-old precocious child advocate, like I was getting signatures for petition to send to our government, like all of that, to being prostituted by my boyfriend? Well, it didn't happen, in one fell swoop. I was actually only in the relationship with my trafficker for a very short time. We were together for a total of 4, maybe 5 months. So that's the whole time I was trafficked was maybe only 5 months. But what led to me getting into that relationship is that when shortly after I started the advocacy work, a couple of years later, I was groomed and then sexually assaulted by my friend's uncle for several years. It went on through most of my teenagehood. And that obviously, that amount of trauma, I didn't tell anyone. I kept up appearances. I was still a good kid for the most part, but I started having this split life where I was getting straight A's, but then I was smoking weed, doing mushrooms, then doing ketamine, like just falling into this world of drugs, but really keeping up appearances for the most part. Nothing that really sparked anything more than, well, that's a teenager being a teenager. Like, oh, look, they're sullen. Oh, look, they're wearing weird clothes. Like nothing that would have sparked anything more, any regular parent being like, oh, good, I have a 16-year-old. This is fun.
Yeah.
And so when I graduated from high school, it was about the same time or shortly thereafter, just after, the criminal justice system got involved with my friend's uncle, who had abused not only me, but my friend as well, when we found out. So we ended up going to the police. And when the criminal justice system got involved, it really sent me off the rails, because up until that point, I had been able to, more convincingly at times than others, but lie to myself about what was happening. Because I was this 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old nerd who, had round glasses and a unibrow and hairy arms and like all of this. And then this 30-something-year-old good-looking man was showing me interest and was attracted to me. That's how I saw it. I saw it as this sort of clandestine relationship.
Yeah.
I wasn't screaming and fighting and saying no constantly. I knew it was wrong because I knew not to tell anyone, but I felt special. Like I felt loved. I felt attractive, which I was being taught and socialized to believe that that was the most important thing I could be as a girl growing up. So once the criminal justice system got involved, they took that story and like lit it on fire. Obviously, it was not a clandestine relationship. It was abuse. There's no reason a 30-year-old man should be, or a 13-year-old girl should be in any sort of sexual anything.
Yeah. Right.
So for me, I was a really smart kid, but I had very effectively lied to myself. So once I faced the truth, like I said, I went off the rails, and I was still kind of keeping the split life, because I was at that point managing a tanning salon, 2 locations of a tanning salon, but I was doing meth in the evenings. I was partying and doing meth. So when the town drug dealer, whom I had been aware of, but we hadn't met, came into my salon and showed interest in me, I was like, yeah, absolutely. This seems like a great idea. And that, because I knew of him, I knew of his reputation. I knew he was violent. I knew he was a drug dealer. I knew he was a drug user. He'd been in jail for most of my teenagehood. I knew his brother, who was, almost as violent. And so there was no, like, he didn't romance me into this so much. I was like, I was angry, and I was looking to make, bad choices, I guess. And so I knew what I was getting into, or I thought I did, when I dated him. So it was even that made me feel like I wasn't faked into love. He didn't Romeo pimp me, right? He didn't, shower me with gifts and love and tell me how much he loved me and make me fall in love with him. He was exactly who he was, and that was what I was looking for.
You were at a place in your life where you were broken in a way, and young and impressionable, and, just not really thinking about consequences, just looking for immediate gratification, right? As
Absolutely.
most teenagers do.
Yeah. And at this point, I was 20 years old when I met him, and this is all, years of therapy. I can now unwrap this. So this isn't what I'm thinking at 20. It's what I'm now realizing in hindsight. But I was subconsciously realizing that like being the good kid, being the nerd who got petition signatures and did fundraising and all of that, that got me nowhere. That got me sexually assaulted. And then I even tried to like figure that one out. And then the criminal justice system, so going to the police, which is the right thing to do, got me, dragged through the criminal justice system, which felt like being brutalized in a way that the abuse had never felt like. So there was this sort of like 180 of like, I did the good girl thing. I did the right thing. And that got me nowhere. So now I'm going to do the bad girl thing. And maybe that will get me the power or respect or safety and security, love, whatever it was. It'll get me what I'm looking for. So dating, the town bad boy that seemed like a good idea.
Yeah.
And so when he turned to me and was like, hey, we're doing more of the drugs than we're selling. Like we need to supplement our income. You want to help me? I was like, yeah. Cause now I'm not just the like trophy girlfriend or the wifey. Now we're like business partners.
Yeah.
And so that felt like I was getting, I guess, more power, more station sort of in life. And again, I said yes to that. And it took me so long to understand that just because I said yes to one thing, it didn't like throw the door open to all the future yeses of all the future questions he asked me. But that's what it had felt to me at the time. And it felt like I couldn't say no. And our relationship got very violent very quickly. So there was the coercion piece of feeling like I couldn't say no. There was force in there because there was a lot of violence, which, amped up the coercion because I knew there was repercussions if I said no.
Right.
And so this just spiraled out of control. So from him originally, saying, hey, do you want to distract people so I can steal some things from them and we can like pawn them? That's how we'll supplement our income. This sort of snowballed into, well, distract them by doing, something more sexual, or distract that guy specifically by taking him into that room. Or literally we're hanging out at a strip club one day and me feeling my feet leave the floor as I'm deposited up on stage. And I'm told, don't get down until you've made me some money.
Yeah.
Me being sold to that strip club owner. I still don't know exactly why. Finding out he was drugging me and taking pictures of me and selling them online. All of these things, I chalked up to mostly my own bad choices because like I knew he was a bad dude and I had said yes to helping him steal from people. So, how could I say no whenever we got to the point where I was like, actually, I don't want to. I didn't feel like, and I was told by him, I didn't have a right to say no. So I chalked it, like I said, I chalked it all up to like a series of my own bad decisions and domestic violence. I had no understanding that all of those things I just described count as human trafficking.
Yeah. Because like, as you're describing this, like, right, we're all familiar with abusive relationships, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning like we know about them. They're depicted on TV. You see, this scenario played out so much in the sense where, the bad boy is overpowering, physically violent, scared, the woman is scared to leave, scared to do anything really. But I guess I never realized or thought about domestic abuse or a relationship like that also being trafficking. But I guess when you're being coerced to do these things and, manipulated in a way to behave in a certain way, mm-hmm. That's really trafficking.
So you can think of trafficking is like, I'll speak specifically to sex trafficking right now.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's when you have someone who is compelling or coercing or forcing another person to engage in some form of commercial sex. And to clarify, that doesn't necessarily mean penetrative sex. It can be stripping. It can be using your body in a sexual way, and then money or something of value is given.
Yeah.
And a third party profits. So I was using my body in a sexual way when I was put on stage, when I was using my body to distract people. It was my body that was in the pictures. Yeah. And whenever something of value came back, usually money, but sometimes drugs, or we got, things at first to pawn. So it doesn't, again, it's not necessarily just penetrative sex in exchange for money.
Sure.
It's
Right.
any sort of sexual act in exchange for anything of value when a third party profits. So I wasn't keeping those profits. My boyfriend was.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it trafficking.
I
The
see.
biggest
Yep.
difference to understand, I think, or not biggest difference, but when someone is under the age of 18, it's trafficking because someone under the age of 18 can't engage in commercial sex. But if someone over the age of 18, there just has to be force, fraud, or coercion present, which there clearly was. And the thing is, oftentimes there is, and you don't even realize there is until you're enough removed from the situation to be like, whoa,
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that. I had to tell myself, I had to create this lie that I did want to do that I was having fun, that I was, this was temporary until we made enough money to do this or whatever it is. Because if I admitted to myself in that moment that I was doing these sexual things for money, like I remember thinking, if like at first, the few times that thought came into my head, I had to like bat it out of my head as quickly as I could because I could feel my mind about to snap just at this, like, this is not who I am. This is not what I do. But I couldn't change what my body was doing. So I had to change my mind.
Right.
That's called cognitive dissonance, when what your values aren't matching up with your actions. And more often than not, we can change our actions. Okay, I'm not going to steal because that's not part of my values. Well, if I'm being forced to steal, then I'm going to have to change my values. So maybe it's okay if I steal from these people because they have enough money, right? Or maybe it's okay because I'm doing it because I love my boyfriend and it's temporary or whatever it is.
So, I know you work, in advocacy now. I mean, how prevalent is this? Like, how much is this happening all around us?
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's just pervasive. It's happening everywhere.
It is in every big city. It is in most, if not all, rural communities on some level. As soon as people start recognizing that trafficking is not the big thing they have in their mind, involving massive crime rings and shipping people, in shipping containers and all of that, it's literally can be just a boyfriend saying, hey, we're not going to make rent this month. Can you go, keep the landlord happy or something like that? Or I need you to get on stage for a couple nights and make us some good cash just to help our cash flow for a little bit or whatever it is. Then suddenly it starts going, hold on. I think I've seen that. And I will tell you at nearly every, if not every talk I've done, from the States to Canada, from, community members to youth to professional caregivers, barring people who are already in the trafficking field and know, like, this is not the first time they're learning about it. But every single time I've done a talk, which is mostly with people who are mostly learning about it for the first time, I get a disclosure of someone either saying, oh my God, I think I was trafficked, or, oh my God, I think my friend was trafficked.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would think too, with, the presence of all of these online, whatever you call them, platforms, that this is probably even worse of a problem than it was, say 5-10 years ago. So when we're working with the victims and, we're working with youth and young women, how do we educate? How do we educate these young women? How do we keep this from happening to them? Is it just sharing your experience? Is it educating them on what trafficking actually looks like? Like, how can we help people that, may be vulnerable to these certain situations understand what's happening to them and then maybe get out?
I have a 2-part answer for that.
Okay.
Because there's an answer of how do we do this in the short term, but then there's an answer that's not sustainable. So what do we do in the long term? So the short-term solution is to be talking about healthy relationships from a really young age, to be talking about boundaries and what it looks like when someone starts pushing those boundaries, to be talking to people about what love bombing is. If somebody is so interested in you that, you've never ever had someone ask you this many questions or buy you this many gifts or that sort of thing, to recognize that. We want to start teaching our youth and our kids that tiny little feeling in your gut that says, oh, if I'm fully in control of this situation, or something feels a little off, or maybe I shouldn't tell my friends or my parents about this part of my relationship or something. That's your gut telling you something's not right. Listen to it. We have taught women and girls for so long to quiet that part of ourselves in the name of being polite.
Yeah.
Just accept the drink. He's like, what's so bad about accepting the drink? Well, if you said no and you accept the drink, then he's just, pushed past that boundary. And that makes it that much easier to push past the next one, because you've been taught to be polite over protecting your own intuition. So we need to reverse that. Protect intuition.
Definitely think that's a must. A must.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. The other thing I always say is look out for your friends. So often we will excuse behavior for ourselves that we would never excuse for our friends, especially teenagers, right?
Yeah.
You have like people who look out and say that boyfriend's not good for you, or, that girlfriend's really controlling, or whatever it is. So look out for your friends is always a good one. And for parents, I will say, as you mentioned, the online world, it is a wonderful tool. It is also a very dangerous tool if it is not used properly. So be as aware and as present with your kids' online presence and their online usage as much as possible. Kids are not owed privacy online the second they get a cell phone. That can be earned, right? That is
100%.
something I'm absolutely huge on. Yes, you can download apps to keep your kids safe that do this and do that, but realistically, the best app to have on your kid's phone is you. And it's you going through their phone. Be honest with them that you're doing it, because you don't want to lose their trust. But like, hey, if you want to have this device that connects you to literally every human in this world, or, most humans in this world,
Right.
I'm going to be in some control of that. Just as at your age, whatever age this is, they're maybe getting their first cell phone. You're probably not going to drop them in the middle of New York City or, a major city and be like, good luck, right?
Yeah.
You have to teach them how to enjoy the freedoms and the information that is going to be coming at them. They're not drinking from, once they get a cell phone and they have like online access, they're no longer drinking information from a garden hose, right? It's now a fire hose. And it is your job to try and filter that as much as possible and help them learn how to process all that information. So that is good. Like everyone should be doing that for sure. But long-term is to stop excluding boys and men from this conversation. Because you asked me, how do we talk to our girls about this? Before we were recording, you were telling me I have 3 daughters. How do I talk to them? Or I want to learn about this. And to create sustainable change, we cannot just keep teaching people. And this isn't just trafficking, but speaking to trafficking, we cannot just keep teaching people how not to be victimized, right? Because on some level, you are saying, I'm lucky enough that I got this information, whether it's from my mom or my school or my community or online or something. So I'm more protected. Go get the other girl who didn't have the support, who didn't have someone teaching her what to look out for. We don't want to do that. Like sisterhood, hello, we're not saying don't attack me, attack someone else who's more vulnerable. What we want to be saying is linking arms and saying, hey, men, like, don't attack any of us. And for the good men, because there's so many good men out there, to be linking arms with us and saying, yep, we agree. What can we do? How can we participate in this conversation? And to do that, to bring men and boys into this conversation, we need to teach them just as much about healthy relationships, about understanding that no means no is not like the start of a conversation. A no is not the beginning of a conversation. It's the end of it. You've been given an answer. Don't keep trying, right? Yeah. We need to stop teaching 50% of the population that they're the gas pedal and their job is to go when we're talking about sexual intimacy, and the other 50% that they're the brake and their job is to control the speed, right? That we're not teaching congruent information to both boys and girls and to everybody. So I think that's where we need to create sustainable change. We need to start including boys and men into this conversation and being like, hey, on a very basic level, you need to understand what non-consent looks like when it's shoulders up by the ears, or when it's someone going, maybe later, or something like that. You need to understand that and respect that. And on the far end of that spectrum, don't sell other human beings. It's not okay, right?
Right.
We need to incorporate those values. That's how we create sustainable change. It's not just yanking potential victims out of the water. It's figuring out why they're falling in the first place, and who's in there, who the piranhas are, for lack of a better, metaphor. And we need to figure out why the waters are piranha infested and get those piranhas out.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Educating everyone, opening up the conversation. I think, and to your point, it's not just, obviously human trafficking, but just hearing your story, obviously the sexual assault that happened to you earlier on, when you were younger, which led to the drugs, which led to that feeling of like, right, there's all these things that happen along the way. So it's like, where does the education has to start when they're young, empowering, educating, because that's where the cycle can start, right? Like you want to kind of cut it off at the very beginning of the cycle. And unfortunately, I think there are many women, many men who, go through these traumas in their life, not healed from the traumas. And, like you said, going through the criminal justice system was even more brutal than the trauma that you had already experienced. Like, that's a really tough thing to have to go through. It really is. And, I thank you for sharing so vulnerably today and for being so open about your experience. And, I'm so grateful to have you on to share that. But it's also wonderful to see how you have come through all of those experiences, and how you have made it to the other side, and not just, healed. Well, you're healing. I'm sure it's a complete process, continual process, healing yourself, but working to really help others. So tell us about it's Laughing Survivor, and where people can find information on that.
Absolutely. And thank you very much for all of those super kind words. And again, for using your platform to host a discussion that I know so many shy away from. And that is huge. So
absolutely.
Thank you. So the Laughing Survivor, I am admittedly right now basically only on Instagram. And even that, I'm going to say, I kind of am still learning how to use. I have little kids at home, and I'm writing a book. So, there's so many balls you can keep in the air before you're like, well, something's got to go. And unfortunately,
we know.
Yeah, exactly. So please, everyone, find me on Instagram at The Laughing Survivor. Follow and be patient as I learn to use it and show up and disappear. I am giving a TEDx talk in January, which I'm super excited about. January 20th, depending on when this comes out, will either be just coming up or...
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah. Love that. Okay.
Follow my Instagram, because if you're, I'm sure most of your listeners are not in the British Columbia specific area, but there will be availability to buy tickets for that if this comes out beforehand, to do it like for Zoom. Okay. And keep an eye out for my book, which I am hoping to, in the next year, get out. So all of that. And then the other thing I'll say is, for anyone who is interested in more tips and tricks as like a parent, or learning a little bit more about trafficking, or has youth that they want to give some resources to, if you check out uprisingyo.org, so uprisingwyo.org, that's my nonprofit that's based out of Wyoming, and we continue to do awesome work. And the website itself has lots of resources that are both adult focused and youth focused as well.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we'll be sure to link that website in the show notes as well, so people can check that out. So again, Alexandra, thank you so much for your vulnerability today. Thank you for enlightening us. Thank you for educating us. Thank you for making the distinction between human smuggling and trafficking for us. I think that all of these things, it's a start. It's a start to really start educating us in this topic. So thank you for sharing your story. And we will link all of that information, including your Instagram, in the show notes. And I just want to thank my listeners so much for being here with us today. Be sure to follow Suburban Warrior on the podcast and as well on Instagram. And we will be back next week with another amazing warrior story for you. Have a great week. Talk to you next time.